Guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly Q&A videos. This is season 8, episode 38. As we mentioned, sometimes if you're on YouTube right now, links in the description to get this on all the major podcasting platforms, or most of them. I shouldn't say all because I don't know about all, but a lot of major podcasting platforms anyways. Getting into...
Maybe just before we get into I breathe
very aggressively.
No, let me just point out. So what you're going to watch is the two crystals, so we can get to the final crystal and the prize. If you're not interested in spoilers, don't look at how long this video is because I'm really loving the Pixel 3. It's super snappy. The strategy isn't any different. The characters are the same. The gear loaded is the same. And our approach to how to get through Phantom so quickly is the same. But instead of the best time being just under 12 minutes and, averaging somewhere between, on a really good run, 15 minutes to 20-something, the average is less than 20 minutes. And the fastest run now, I've had another fast run that's under 11 minutes.
Yeah.
So to me, that's pretty darn spectacular. So yeah, I'm loving the Pixel 3. Still Android 9 though, so it doesn't really help us with the glitches, but it really is helping with the play, and it is wicked fast, and that's going to be related to one of the questions later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there we go. And so now getting into the questions, I guess. Our first question of the week comes from Sinemac, and they say, do you know why the random spike in cheaters?
So it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
So I think part of it is that whole idea of sometimes you just notice stuff more when you're looking for it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it actually is more, and sometimes it may not be more, but whoever's got control of it is letting you see more.
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of things. So in the earlier sort of life cycle of Injustice, the devs were monitoring more. And so I think they cared about the game more, and you maybe saw less cheaters, even though there were more people playing. So like when you have a higher sort of number of players playing, I'm thinking in my mind I want to say critical mass, but we see this in so many different things, like in the comments when we get like really bad trolls, like or downvotes for our videos. Yeah. The more popular we were, there was just more of it, and it wasn't just an absolute increase, but it proportionally was more.
Yeah.
And so I think in this later life cycle, there's probably fewer cheaters, but the devs are also monitoring less and doing less about the intervention or waiting until the end of the season.
Yeah. The other thing, too, is that if you're looking at cheated accounts, right, it's not like a real account where if you have 3 people at the top of the leaderboard, they've all spent a huge amount of time doing it, right?
Yeah.
If you're looking at cheaters, if somebody knows how to cheat effectively to the top of the leaderboard, I don't actually know what the process is. I don't know how much work that is. Right. But I'm assuming, well, I'm not assuming, I'm 100% sure that it's less work than getting it without cheating. Right?
That's true.
Because if it was more work, there'd be no point.
And that relates to the next question, too.
Yeah. And so, if somebody's cheating, I'd have to make up a number for how long it takes, but let's say it takes like 5 hours to like get an account like cheated up to the top, and it probably doesn't, right? But, I have no clue what the actual process is, so it could take anywhere from, 20 minutes to, hours. Yeah. One cheater, if they don't name their accounts so that they're clearly in a theme, could be like all of the cheated accounts that you're seeing, theoretically.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
So, it might be a random spike in cheaters, or it might be one person who's, it's just a random spike in the number of cheated hours, right? Where one person is spending more time.
Right.
Maybe one person spends like the amount of time that, we're playing in a week, just hacking accounts and popping them into online multiplayer. And you would see, a very similar thing as, 3 cheaters each, spending however long it takes to get one account up there.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really excellent point, right? Like, what it looks like may not represent actual people.
Yeah.
And so all it does is take it, even though there's there's definitely a lot fewer people playing now than there were before, it just takes one person to really shove in your face, oh, there's a whole bunch of cheating going on. Mm-hmm. And it's totally random. Like if that guy happens to be interested this week, then you see a bunch of it. And the follow-up, the corollary, or not the corollary, the related point that affects what you see is how much the devs are monitoring things
Mm-hmm.
and cleaning it up so that you don't actually see it. So it's quite possible that there were fewer cheaters then. It's also quite possible that we just didn't get to see it, and I guess we'll never know.
Yeah, so we have no clue how many cheaters there are, and we have no clue how many cheaters there were.
Yeah. And I think it's not that there's anything special. It's not like there's anything happening with Injustice that we're aware of that would make it more attractive to flex your hacker muscles during this game. I think, it goes to the fact that we're still a channel playing this game that's not getting a lot of support, that hasn't had an update in a long time.
Yeah.
So why are there so many Injustice videos from us every week? Well, no, you know what I mean, though? Like, it's that all it takes is one person who's interested, and all of a sudden, it'll feel like there's still lots of stuff happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's that. Our next comment comes from Noah Frank L, and they say, like you mentioned, this is related to us talking about spending a lot of time. Could you guys discuss what you think the theoretical limit to battle rating in a single multiplayer season? I know that Scopos has the highest legit with 30 million on iOS, but I think it can go higher. I recently got 24.8 million, and I definitely felt with more recharges I could have gotten over 30 million. So this is an interesting question, right? Because I hear it, and I instantly go, oh, how ridiculous can we get, right? And you did the math on this one. I was thinking about the math, but you actually did it.
I did, and you've got to make a few assumptions. Part of it is, what are the ground rules, right? Do you get to sleep? And that sounds silly, but it's not. Like, any kind of question like this, you have to have some basic assumptions. Because in the absolute kind of limit, I guess you'll be limited by how fast you can do it. And we were able, I think, using just straight energy recharges and nonstop and not having to change out your team or your gear loadout, I think sustainable, which we've shown really last week in our Q&A video where we did 7 ultimates. So 7 ladders where it's a 7-fight ladder with the maximum bonus points and the maximum bonus.
Yeah.
Did that in just 36 minutes. I think if you allow for the fact that when you do it for a long extended period of time, that you're going to potentially make mistakes, and you might want to take bathroom breaks, and you might want to eat a little bit. I think 40 minutes is a fair sort of limit for what you can expect to sustain for a really long period of time. So 40 minutes for a 7 ultimate run, max battle point team.
Yeah.
So 24 hours per day, 60 minutes in an hour, and 7 days per week. And then you divide that by 40 minutes for every 7 ultimates. You multiply it by the 7 ultimates, and you multiply it by 56,000. You're looking at the maximum is what? I had a number there. Did that change?
Yeah, then you changed it to 10% at some point. It was somewhere between 90 and 100 million.
Hold on.
98 million.
98,784,000. I might have to go back and do the numbers again to check, because it's 24. Yeah. So that's if you don't sleep, you don't eat, you're rolling along at
playing constantly
and doing nothing else.
Yeah, and sort of your other option would be trading off with people. If you live with a couple of people, trading off, or potentially making sure like you stay on a call for all the like handoffs, and then you like sign out and sign into accounts so that somebody's playing all the time. And so that's sort of the theoretical limit is probably something around there. And if you got lucky, if you went faster, right? If you did this multiple times, you could probably, pull your average under 40 minutes one of the times you did it, if you actually had like a system to make this sustainable.
Right.
About 100 million, I would say. But
you'd need teammates, because think about it like this. What could you expect one person to do over a 24-hour period? 8 hours? I mean, that seems like the sort of limit to human kind of... like before you really before your performance degrades and your ability to actually do it deteriorates really badly.
Because this is not a game that you could play as efficiently with a bot, I don't think.
Right.
Yeah, I think you need to have somebody on it.
You can tell by looking at the AI.
Yeah. So that's sort of the theoretical like cap is around somewhere around 100 million, probably like just period.
Right. So if you were going to treat it like a full-time job, and that's 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and the 8 hours, I guess you could spread however you want over the day, right? But I mean, that's 40 hours. You're looking at 23.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were looking at, say, the 30 million, you're looking at 8 hours per day for 7 days a week. That's almost 33 million.
Mm-hmm. So these are rough numbers, and it would be interesting to see if anybody had a sort of different perspective on this.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, we've talked about, this is a discussion that I think I've gotten into on Reddit a few times, where people make claims about fights and say, I can do an ultimate in 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then they get interrogated a little bit and say, well, ultimates, 7 fights. And they said, well, and then when they show the video, finally, it's 5 fights. And they say, well, you said it was an ultimate. Mm-hmm. He said, yeah, ultimate is 5 fights. And he said, no, it's 7. And then they don't do some of the early loading screens. And then it's, all that. And then it turns out, well, they did 5 fights from the start of the first fight, not any of the loading screens before, right until the end, and they can get it at just over 3 minutes. And then you realize, okay, so that's actually not such a big deal. Not only is it possible, but it's not even that big a deal, because that's totally doable, right? Mm-hmm. You get a good run. So given the number of times that I've gotten into those kind of discussions, I'm guessing that our number for how fast you can do it is not that far off. Mm-hmm. It's pretty accurate. I mean, total respect for the guys who are willing to do it. I just don't know that I can actually sustain a life independent of that. If I had a week of vacation and I had really nothing else to do, I might be tempted. But again, because of all the hackers and the chance that in that particular season, you're going to put in that effort and still not get either the glory of finishing or the badge. You can see we've got the badge for finishing 3rd place that 1 week, mm-hmm. Which is I think it's Black Adam's take on the Shazam lightning bolt.
Yeah.
But getting first is just, I don't know. It's a
big fight. Yeah. Especially if you might get hacked.
Yeah, and it really puts it in perspective for me too, right? So the 1 week I got, I can't remember how much, I can't remember, it was like 5 or, was it 5 million?
I don't
Maybe
remember.
3 million, somewhere around there, like how much time I would have put into it when I look at the calculations now about what that was actually worth. And I just can't bring myself to do it again.
Yeah, if you're saying that you got 5 million, yeah.
I can't remember, maybe it was closer to 3 million or something. It was somewhere it was less than half of 10. In my mind, I think 10 is sort of the reasonable number that you'd see people hit on a non-hacking kind of a number 1.
Or somebody grinding as much as they humanly can, because clearly, there were people who legitimately got more. That's a sort of dedication to the game. I appreciate the work to get all the way up there.
Yeah.
I think it's cool. Nowhere near that amount of time for either of us to play that much back to back. I
mean, we've accumulated that time, but we've got a lot of miles on that odometer.
It has to be spread out. I think that's there's definitely different ways to come at this game, right? And I sometimes feel like the way that we come at it for the amount that we get into it is pretty intense, right? So it's good to remember that there are still people who are out here grinding even harder than we are.
Yeah.
Sometimes, although I think ours is sort of, we can't fall off the game and come back onto it the same way.
Well, that's the question that we get every once in a while, right? Like, how do you, variations of it. How do you play this game? How have you been playing for so long? How do you stay interested in it? Mm-hmm. I mean, and there's sort of variations on that kind of question too, where on the one hand they say, well, how do you stay interested in it? And the other hand is, what the hell are you doing still playing it?
Yeah.
Which is funny because it's basically the same question.
Yeah, and our solution for staying engaged in the game is make a YouTube channel about it.
Yes. But on top of that, it's the pacing. Like you were saying earlier, it's absolutely if we were playing more, I think I'd be burnt out and I just would stop. I would drop it completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely find that with some games that you really love, if you get too into them and you can just play it until it's not fun anymore.
Yeah.
That's One Night Ultimate Werewolf I found quite a fun game, but me and my friends played it so much that after a certain point, it was almost like we were following a script. There was only sort of two ways to do things, which was make it like if it was a solvable game, if there was enough information that if you came together and talked things through in the right way, you could probably figure it out, then we mostly would get it every time. And so you'd need to inject enough confusion that it was never possible if people were lying, which because it's werewolf, people were lying. It was never possible to be 100% certain unless you happen to get some like weird stroke of luck. Right. And so we hit a point where when it started out, people were going wild and doing all sorts of things, and every game felt different. And then after a certain point, games felt mostly the same because we knew sort of what made the most sense to do.
Right. Yeah, I guess the really good games, the really complex games, don't let you... They have enough possibilities and permutations that you don't get to that point where you know everything that's potentially going to happen. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be everything potentially that's going to happen with a rational actor. Like, I think, an example to me like that would be of chess, where it feels like for people, I guess, who study it, that a lot of the possibilities have been sort of established. Yeah,
that there's a lot of moves in which there's like a better response. Right. Or even if there's a couple of responses that there's a pretty sort of narrow possibility space. Right. Chess theoretically has like, I don't know, probably like trillions of moves. Right. I don't know how many orders of magnitude. But, at any one moment for like a professional chess player, there's probably way less that actually makes sense for them to.
Yeah, but if you assume rational actors, then that number drops, right? And I think that's a big part of it, that if you could do other stuff, but they would be weaker moves, and somebody who's actually really experienced with chess would totally, like, destroy you.
Yeah, it's interesting, because chess is one of those games, and there's a decent number of games like that, which have enough complexity that it's not just about making what the optimal move is always. It really does matter how good the person you're playing against is, because that's what you're talking about is rational actors, right? Yeah. Chess is a very different game if you're playing with somebody who doesn't know how to punish suboptimal moves. Right. So some moves, and it's the same with, Injustice, right? It's about the meta. It's not just about your team. Right. It's about how your team interacts with the average team that you face, and then all the possible teams that you could face, right? Where if you're playing chess against somebody and you can make a move that theoretically somebody else who is really good at chess could make you really regret. They might need to know something specific or be able to visualize something specific or look forward enough turns to be able to actually, make you regret it. And if you played it against an average chess player.
Normal.
Not normal.
I know, but you said, I heard you start saying with the
But at different skill levels, right? Right. The reaction to that move is going to be totally different. And I think that's one of those things that's really interesting, where your skill level and your opponent's skill level almost makes you like renegotiate your relationship to the game that you're playing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a perfect way to put it. Yeah. No, that's exactly what I was thinking. That it will change, right? Yeah. I mean, think about it like this. If we were playing the AI versus playing a real person in these fights, what a difference it would make in terms of our strategy, because there's certain things that we wouldn't be able to get away with the same way. Yeah.
And I think another place that you see a lot of that in a really interesting way is speedrunning games. Because you probably haven't watched much in terms of speedrunning. That's not something you're interested in.
Oh, I was interested in. I used to play GoldenEye. Yeah. And there was a setting on it where you would get certain ranks or recognitions if you could finish the level within a certain time, like a time limit. And holy crap, there was one that was really short. I can't even remember because it's been so long. Yeah. I had to play it so many times. And it was, you had to not only know exactly what to do, you had to execute it perfectly. Yeah. To do it. Yeah. So go ahead, sorry.
Well, GoldenEye speedrunning is really interesting, because there was a thing, like the actual speedrunning community for GoldenEye, there was a thing where if you look straight down, or really close to down, it would have less textures rendered, and it would make your game run smoother. Ooh. So a bunch of professional speedrunners quit the game when it was discovered, because the best way to have world record times was to spend the entire speedrun just looking straight down, and it was just like not fun for them anymore. Right. But so that's what I'm talking about renegotiating your relationship to the game, right? Is that like, even within just what you're talking about is just like what GoldenEye as a game sets out for what they think, a more dedicated player would do, but it's specifically thought of by the developers, right?
Right.
And that's a totally different way of playing the game than just trying to, like, you know, beat it. Right? But then past that, when you look at speedrunning, so many games are unrecognizable in the speedruns.
Right.
I'm not into speedrunning, like playing them myself, but I watch every once in a while, people do stuff. And there's, like, if you look at the Titanfall 2 world record speedrun for the single player, I played Titanfall 2. I had a great time with it. And when I watch the speedrun, it almost doesn't look like the same game. Because they're constantly moving so blisteringly fast.
Right.
And Titanfall is a game that is already kind of about speed. There's, like, a lot of wall running and navigation, so you already feel like you're kind of motoring when you play Titanfall. But when you watch the speedrun, like, a level will start and it'll load in, and they'll, like, launch themselves into the, like, sky. They'll, like, launch themselves across the room, like, the second the level starts. And I'm just like, I don't even, like, know what's happening. And so I think, like, a lot of video games, I think, are pretty good at making you renegotiate your relationship with the game. And I think one game genre that is almost defined on that is idle games and clicker games. Because the way that it works, right, you're sort of, you start off, like, one click is like 1 point, 1 unit, and then you get something that, like, doubles it or triples it or quadruples it, and there's a huge sort of, like, exponential growth in the way that a lot of them work with, like, the building systems on top of systems. By the time you get to the end of it, you're engaging with something entirely different from what you're engaging with when you started. And because clicker games tend to be lighter on, like, actual play mechanics,
right?
And heavier on strategy. I mean, adding new layers of strategy is one way that they make the game more interesting. Or just even, like, adding whole, like, new systems on top of stuff. So you're constantly, just doing stuff in a really different way. And some games keep it sort of narrow and tight. Some games make you do the same thing throughout, where you're always sort of looking at it through the same lens. Like, I played a little bit of Idle Champions of the Forgotten Realms, and that game is based off of doing quests and leveling up your guys. And so you know, are getting better gear and stuff, you're getting higher stats, but at the end of the day, the way that, you know, the sort of interface is constantly, like, you, like, plopping dudes down onto a board and fighting enemies. And there's, you know, strategy to that. That's, sort of doing it a disservice to say that that's all it is. But that's, like, the way that you interact with things, is, like, leveling people up, getting new stuff, and then putting them out into the sort of the same thing. And then another game that I played, Pincremental, which is this, like, pinball idle game, is totally based around you going to these new layers, and then the
Did you say pinball?
Yeah.
That, to me, that would take away, like, the best part of pinball. Like, if you were gonna do it. Oh, geez, that's interesting.
Well, it's a really simple, like, the pinball mechanics are really simple, and that's sort of the core to it. But the whole sort of that's what I'm saying, is that it really does make you interact with it in a totally new way over and over again, because the idea is that, like, a lot of idle games have you reset whatever you're doing, and then you get some sort of next tier up currency that you can use for permanent upgrades. And so there's resetting, and then there's some sort of permanent increase. And so Pincremental does it in a really interesting way, where there's tiers, and each tier resets everything underneath it. So you have almost like a binary system, right? Where you get a bunch of upgrades in one tier, and then you roll over to the next one and reset the first one. And then you get some upgrades in the second tier that let you get to the point where you can reset the first tier again faster and over again. But the interesting thing is that the further in you get, the upgrades at the later levels are designed to automate processes at the earlier levels. So when you first do it, you're doing hitting paddles, and you're trying to hit the pins for points, and then you use points to upgrade. So one of the point upgrades that you can get makes you, like, doubles your points every time you hit one of the bumpers.
Right.
And then another the other two upgrades at that level give you, like, multipliers based off of your current score and your high score without the, you know, ball dropping. And then you get to one of the later tiers, and the later tier will automatically spend your points for you on those upgrades, so that you no longer have to interact with that. And then there's upgrades that, like, for example, automatically hit the paddles for you. So it's, you know, harder to lose and you don't actually have to play the pinball game anymore. And then a later tier lets you automatically buy the upgrade that automatically buys the paddles, the paddle like flippers for you, so that you don't even need to go and click on the button to buy it. And so you're constantly going to the next tier up and then trying to automate everything at the bottom tier. So you sort of move to a level and, you know, you have to go through it a couple times, but then you get to that point. And then when you get to like the really sort of even higher tiers, all those automation upgrades go away. So you're constantly over and over again changing your relationship, where it starts out you're playing a pinball game and then you're sort of playing like a resource management game, right? Where you're buying them and then you're automating that. And then
it sounds appealing. I don't know if I'd like it. At some point I think I'd like to find some sort of steady state with a game.
Yeah.
And not, if I was looking for something new, I would be playing a different game.
Mm-hmm.
And the danger anytime it switches is that it becomes a game that you don't want to play.
It's not totally new, because it sort of goes from a pinball game to a game that's more about resource management. It sort of goes from a sliding scale from the start, where you're just sort of playing pinball in this like really basic pinball arcade, and then you're moving more and more towards just sort of spending resources and like buying upgrades in the right order and stuff. But
it's an interesting gamble on the parts of the developers, right? That you're going to be able to find, creating one game that people can engage with is hard enough. Creating two is what you're essentially doing to maintain your audience.
I feel like the sort of loop of idle games has been pretty well established. I think like idle games in a lot of ways are games that pull most of the sort of gameplay out of games.
Yeah.
And, you know, it would be like Injustice if like the only thing that you could do was like send people out on missions, but there was a bunch of like layers of complexity of like collecting stuff. And, you know, different idle games have, we've talked about idle games before for sure, but have different like layers of like how engaging like the basic sort of inputs are, that sort of baseline playing. But I think they work on sort of similar reward loops. So I think a lot of them, it's not as much of a bet as you think it is, because if you're going into it and you know it's an idle game, you pretty much know what you're getting. And it's different flavors of the same thing. It's the same as like deck building card-based roguelites. Or roguelikes. Okay. Which you also probably don't have experience with at all.
None.
But like, so I like them a lot. You go through, and what it tends to be is that there's like a map that has like diverting paths, and so you get to sort of chart your journey up chunks of the map, right? And you go, I want to go to the shop at this point, right? So like I'm gonna fight a battle, and then like a mini boss, and then a shop, and it's all like the same kind of thing. So you have this sort of branching tree that converges on a boss.
Yeah.
And then, usually after each fight, but sometimes, you know, only at shops, there's some trigger for you to get new cards, which you add to your deck. So it's like and then you use the cards as sort of like your attacks or your moves. And so there's a bunch of different card-based roguelike games that I've played, and they're all sort of variations. The big one, the one that everybody sort of started with, was like Slay the Spire. And
it's like you're talking another language to me.
Just Slay the Spire was the main one, the big one, the one that sort of like kicked off the genre in a big way. I don't know if it's the first one ever, but it's the first one to really popularize all the mechanics. And then there's a bunch of different variations, because Slay the Spire is just sort of go through and build up a deck, and right, if you can get lucky, they all sort of work on the system where there tends to be like combos, there tends to be strategies, and so if you get lucky and you get the right set of cards, you can build something really special where they work together in a really effective way, to sort of like a cascade of like actions and interactions. So it's like a really, really good synergy for your team, right? Yeah. But it would be like if you're playing like Survivor, but after every fight you got you got to select between 3 random pieces of gear, right? Or if you got lucky, you could have a really good synergy team. And if you didn't, you know, you do your best with what you got, right? You never like give up, but you sometimes don't get so lucky. And there's a bunch of variations on it. And I really like them. There's One Step from Eden, which takes the formula but then makes it really sort of like a fast-paced, frenetic, like Mega Man Battle Network style game,
right?
Where it really is more about the gameplay than the drafting, and the drafting is sort of what just lets you replay it over and over again. And then there's like a bunch of others. I played Monster Train, Rogue Book. I find it a really sort of compelling genre, because you sort of feel like you've tricked the game when you get a really nice synergy. And it scratches that itch in the same way that, like, making, like, a really cool Injustice team does.
Yeah.
Except instead of just making them and then it's a sort of one and done, you... maybe in a run, you get a couple of cards and you go, oh, these are really cool. You know what would be cool is if I had these cards and this card. And then you sort of think about it for a future run. But because each run, out of the entire possibility space, you're sort of constrained to your, like, randomly pick between 3 cards options at each stage. You have to, keep playing. Even if you know exactly what you want to do. Sometimes you need to keep playing a couple times to get lucky. Or... you'll see a card that you weren't expecting, but you go, oh, I could probably use this, and then all of a sudden it goes in a different direction. It's an interesting sort of, like, balancing, like, future possibility that I actually like for a lot of the same reasons I like planning Injustice. But it's like, idle games have sort of what they are, and most games are similar, and then they have sort of their own spins, their own variations. Right. And it's the same with the deck building games, where a lot of them are, similar. They have a really, really similar core, but then the variations can make them feel like totally different experiences, and the amount of, like, effort and care into how you balance them.
Right.
I think, like, idle games and those games are genres that, because a lot of them are so similar, it really stands out when somebody has an understanding and love of the genre and a good idea for where to take it.
Mm-hmm.
That really makes it something special, right? And I think, like, honestly, Injustice Mobile, as far as a fighting game goes, I think they looked at the limitations, they did something really different, and I think they did have some really strong ideas and did something special with it.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why it's so enduring, because they really... The twist for Injustice Mobile is, what if we took a fighting game and made it more about long-term progression, right? Because I think the sort of standard fighting game is not about long-term progression at all. The whole point is about, like, only about skill, right? And not about, like, acquisition of resources. And the way that they've implemented getting new stuff and making your guys better, right? Like, in a forever way, not like in a just, I'm, like, more skilled now way.
Right.
Really gave it some legs.
Right.
Yeah. So there we go. We actually didn't even get through all of our questions. We have a question at the end, but we'll probably save it for next time.
We're gonna save it
because we're right at the end here. So that was our ramble about games.
And Crystal's done.
And the
Final Crystal's done. So if we finish talking before the end, you will still get to see what our prize was.
Yeah. So, coming up on the end here, we have some stuff that we like to say to people. So first off, I'd like to give a shout out to Eliza the Magic Touch Caton. She always manages to get an extra bag of plantain chips for free at the vending machine at her job.
It's actually, we just learned this the other day. It's pronounced plantain.
Plantain.
Even though it's spelt plantain.
I like plantain.
Yeah.
I'll be wrong. I'll be wrong happily unless somebody gives me a compelling reason to be right about this, because it's plantain in my head so strongly. But this shout out was brought to you by probably someone who stocks the vending machines wrong. Who puts them too close together so that two come out at once instead of just one. But anyways, we'd also like to give a huge thank you, and I'm going to give it a second just so that we can see our rewards here. There we go. Nice.
Metal.
Okay. A huge thank you to all the wonderful folks who support us on Patreon.
That would be Victor Gomez, Consul Peasant, and Edwoon at the top tier at Last Word. Sinemac, Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier. Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., Irvin Ruiz, and Eddydoo at the credited level. And Chris Wolf, Scarlett Danny, Awesome Gamer 241, Pavu RS, Gavin Malott, and Isfar E at the gratitude level.
Yeah, thank you so much for your support. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.